I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this is a first deal episode where we walk through what it takes for someone to find, fund, and close on their first apartment complex. And if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you are probably trying to do exactly the same thing. So before we get to this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button below and the little notification bell to make sure you get notified every single time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show. What advice would you guys give an aspiring investor 6 to 12 months behind you?
Step out of the comfort zone to networking before you have the first deal. So know what your core value is and what the skill you can contribute to other teams and what is the partner you're looking for.
Do develop these relationships, even if it's new people like you. Get out there and network and have a core group of friends already set up. You have to set certain goals and you have to meet them.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. Very excited for today's show. It's one of our first deal episodes, and I really enjoy talking to people about first deals. And today we have Doug and Xiaofeng Harman on the line with us, and they recently closed on a 56-unit apartment complex in Waco, Texas. So Doug, Xiaofeng, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Thank you very much for having us. We're very excited to do it.
Excited
awesome.
To be here.
Yeah. So this is super exciting. Husband-wife combination. I don't see that a whole lot. So let's talk about your guys' background, before getting into apartment investing. And I mean, if you could just, where you were, why you decided to get into apartments, and, we'll go from there.
Ladies first.
We, Doug and I invested real estate like 9 years ago. And then, so at that time, both of us has a full-time W-2 job. And I had a PhD degree of engineer. I'm a principal engineer in the high-tech company and worked for 8 years. So it's totally different industry, but what benefit from us for me to invest in the real estate, especially multifamily, is to get detailed, oriented analyze and systematic management. So that's how we work together.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine your PhD in engineering, although it doesn't directly translate to multifamily, the ideas of building systems and analysis are probably extremely helpful to what you guys are doing right now.
Exactly. So I run the underwriting and very detailed to analyze the market and also the rent and the pro forma as well. So I kind of looking more combined with what I use the method in the high tech to the multifamily, which I think actually the trend for this industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of people coming from tech into multifamily, and I talk to a lot of engineers too, so a whole lot of engineers. But there's a lot of carryovers, and fortunately, it's also a fairly high-paying career. So that when you're looking for investors, you just open up your Rolodex, and there's typically a lot more people in your career field than say somebody who's a janitor. I'm just throwing that out there. But anyway, Doug, anything to add, or do you want to talk about your background that's different?
Yeah, my background was in aviation, mostly my profession. I worked my way up as a mechanic and through management, and finished up my degrees as a technical manager in aviation, and enjoyed it a great deal. On my sideline, though, I'm an extremely mechanical person, and so I was always restoring and working on my houses as I went up, and enjoyed it very much and hated it all at the same time, just like anybody who does renovation stuff.
Right.
And, so I thought this is kind of a natural progression for me. I've always loved houses and structures and real estate too. Even as a kid, I got in a lot of trouble for breaking into houses that were vacant and stuff. Not because I didn't want to do any damage or anything. I was just really interested to see what they look like.
Yeah. I grew up in a neighborhood. When I was 8, we moved to a new neighborhood, And it was one of those neighborhoods that, houses were going up everywhere. It was a brand new subdivision. And I remember every time a house would go up, me and one of my friends, or me and my brother would always, go into the house, look around, look at the floor plans. Hey, this is what this is going to look like, and kind of imagine what things are. And yeah, when you talked about that, it just resonated. I just remember, yeah, I used to do that a lot too. Never the vacant homes, but definitely the ones under construction on weekends, or when nobody else was there. We would definitely do that.
Yeah, it was cool. We would do that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my background.
Mm-hmm.
And then we progressed from there as a couple, I think, before we really got started professionally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's my background. Mostly is aviation. I eventually managed to get into the senior management level as a project manager. I had a large department, 20 managers worked underneath me, with 20 foremen underneath me, and an assistant manager also, as I was working my way up. And that was really my background in my decision inflection point, they would call it. Do I keep going, make it to the director level and all this stuff, or do I depart from this scene and do something else? And the decision is obvious, I think.
I love the inflection points, and so what helped you? What was going through your mind at that inflection point?
That's a huge question for wherever you're at in your life. I was getting successful. I was a senior manager here. I was getting ready to move into the director level and working with a lot of movers and shakers in my industry, a big airline, major company. And I saw what kept resonating in my brain, I could never get rid of it, was Dave Lindel's comment that your boss has got your six pack. And if you haven't heard that term, it means I'm working out every day, lifting the heavy weights, but I should be getting huge, but my boss got all that stuff.
Yep.
And I saw these guys who are very successful and very motivated, who to be successful were working 12-hour days on an everyday basis. They were getting calls on weekends. They were getting calls at night. Yeah, I appreciate that kind of dedication. And if that is your sole motivation in life, go for it. But I'm sorry, you just can't spend the time with your family and the other events in life that you want to and work those kind of hours.
Yeah.
So,
that's a common trend, I think, is that the more successful you get, the more hours it takes, especially corporate America. I worked in government, and it's the same thing there. I was looking at the next promotion, and, the guys one rank ahead of me were working a whole lot more, like exactly the same thing, and I think a lot of what went through your mind, I had to chew on and just make decisions about as well. Just do I want to go to the next level and, increase my dedication by, X amount, or do I want to just, do this multifamily thing? Yeah. And obviously what I chose. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was my decision. I had a new wife and wanted to start a family, and there's just no way to do both effectively. Yeah. And multifamily, don't get me wrong, you got to put in the hours there too. Yeah. But you have a lot more flexibility in how and when and where you do that.
Yep. And I mean, I do most of my multifamily work from a home office, so if I need to, take kids to school or doctor's appointments or anything else, it's super easy. It's not something that I ever was able to do with my previous career, coaching 2 basketball teams, which probably wouldn't have been possible with my previous career too. So, I agree with you 100% on that one.
Yeah, that's gets to motivation, not my background, but if I'm not coaching my kids in soccer or something here soon, I'd go crazy.
Yeah. Yep. So we touched on this quite a bit, but let's distill this down, and let's talk about your big burning why, which I like to call it, your motivation for everything. And like I said, a lot of what you said, I think, feeds into it. But if Doug, you can distill it down, what your big burning why is, and Xiaofeng, after him, you go ahead with yours as well. But I assume there's little differences between the both of you.
Sure, there are. And we talked about that today, that, our motivations may be a little different. We come together in our, execution. Yeah. So, no, my big burning why is Definitely. I don't think it's any different than anybody else's, being able to manage my own time and how I do this, and having some generational wealth and security. Jim Carrey said it best. He said, you can take the safe road or you can take a risk. You can fail just as easy at either one.
Yeah.
And that stuck to my brain too.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I'm in aviation. I watched people get laid off left and right around me my whole life, and they took the safe route. So my big burning why is to have the security and to spend the time with the kids. But I have a ulterior big burning whys also. I like multifamily. I like providing a good home for people. I love the big structures in the real estate. I always have. And I do want to spend more time with the charities of my choice in my communities and stuff. And Lord knows Oakland has a bunch of them. I will say, as a side note on that, don't wait for everything to be just right to do these things, especially when it comes to the charities and stuff. Just do it now and make it work. But it'll become a lot easier when you're able to write your own checks and do your own time.
Along those, something, I think this is a Tony Robbins quote. He basically said, if you can't give $1 out of 10, you'll never give 100,000 out of 1,000,000, or something like that. If you can't get a small amount, when you're making a small amount, you'll never give that big, large check. So I think that a lot of wisdom in what you said there.
Yeah, don't wait. It'll never be perfect.
Right.
And then, that's advice I'm still trying to follow myself.
Yeah.
And then I want the people around me to really benefit from our relationship. And that mainly deals with co-investors and experts in this field. I just set up not a friend, a lawyer called me up, asked me about a deal. I got hooked up with it. It wasn't for us. It's a 6-story steel building in downtown Dallas. Not something I can help with, but I did hook him up with a couple of contractors that we had met along the way that are good at this kind of stuff. And that makes me feel really good to be able to help people out. And I think there's other advice out there. I don't remember what the code is. Don't necessarily expect it back. If you call this guy up and he doesn't necessarily help you out, well, that can sting a little bit. But the fruit on the tree is being able to help people out and being someone that helps people out and a good associate.
Yeah. Xiaofeng, how about you? What's your big burning why?
I think a lot of part is the same as Doug, definitely is. And for me, there is 2 big burning why. One is we have kids late in our life. They're 3-year-old and 5-year-old right now. To have a financial freedom is so important for us to be with them when they need us, and then really have time to raise them, to be with them, instead of just to send them to the school from 9 to 5. And we want to, have the capability to do that, and also be able to help our family, friends, and the same, like, contribute to our local community. And that's so important for us.
Yeah, I love it.
I just don't know how you do it all without having the freedom to do so. At least be more comfortable in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, something that I thought of when you said that, my oldest daughter is 22 and I was 22 when she was born. And I was almost 40 when my youngest daughter was born, big spread between them, and, very, very different lives, and, sometimes my daughters will mention this to me, but when my oldest daughter was born, I had a lot more energy. I was physically able to do a lot more with them, and now that I'm, mid 40s and I got a 6-year-old, I'm not crawling around in the park with them, going down the slides with them as much, but financially we're able to do a lot more and spend a lot more time with them. So there's pros and cons both directions. But end of the day, and I've asked this big burning why question hundreds of times. I think a lot of it comes down to, I want to spend time with the people I love. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest motivations with people is, spending time with the people you love. And for you, it's your children and each other. So let's shift gears and talk about apartment investing now. Now we got the big burning why out.
Mhm.
So let's talk about this deal you guys had, 56 units, Waco, Texas. So first thing I'd like to talk about is how did you guys, educate yourself in the apartment community? And also, what were some of the biggest challenges you had starting out?
Education was, on looking back on it, was a pretty, I think, an easy part for us. We didn't always know the future, but education was basically starting off with some real nuts and bolts. We got the David Lindahl course, and we did
Tim Brass,
Tim
Lexi.
Okay.
Yeah, we joined the Tim Brass, Lexi
but yeah,
mentor.
back to the David thing, David Lindahl. We had a mentor with him for a little bit,
Yeah.
and or one of
Yes.
his team. I always thought he was really excellent at the nuts and bolts and the basic advice and everything else. And then getting associated with Tim Bratz and their group, I think they were a little more nuts and bolts also.
Very systematic
Very
education.
systematic. It was very, very important to work with his team for acquisitions. They have a very
Yeah.
systematic process for acquisitions. And I think they're one of their strongest suits where it was Matt with Tim Bratz. He has an extremely systematic approach to renovations and stabilization. And, I'm a project manager. I like to think I know all that stuff already and don't have much to learn, but this is a specialty, and being able to stand on their shoulders and use their systems and ask questions about how they implement was, I think, critical.
Right.
Yeah.
I think for education, we definitely focus on educate ourselves first for the first almost 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't like it, and probably it's taking too long for us.
To be clear, though, we did do deals during that first 2 years also.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, at least it was in your bio, you did several, small multifamilies as well. Did you guys passively invest in other deals or?
No, and that's a great segue to this question. After that, we educated ourselves in relationships, and I think that's one of the most important parts. We're part of the MIH Mastermind now.
Okay.
That is strictly about relationships. They drill you down. They make you make the connections, do the calls with people. I think that's such a huge factor for me, because I'm a loner. I just kind of do things on my own, and to be forced into that environment really saved our last deal.
Right.
And it's everything.
Yeah.
There's always somebody who knows something if you have a lot of friends to ask. That was critical, and I think that's the 3 stages: the nuts and bolts, then getting associated with the pieces of renovating and stabilizing, and then the relationships. And I don't say that in that order. You can make the relationships from day one.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of our investment, we do a little small multifamily at the beginning. And then we actually do new construction on a high-end single-family house here in the Bay Area.
Right.
And all of this experience, actually, we do by ourselves pretty much. So we have really hard time or take a long time to know how to partner or build the team.
Yeah, and then how to keep those relationships going. We meet the people and then we never talk to them again.
Right.
So that's tough for me.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the learning curve for us. We educate ourselves and then step out of the comfort zone to really know other people and let them know us is a different level.
It really is. And there's I think it was on your podcast or someone's podcast here a while ago about how to keep networking going. And the 6-minute network, do that for 6 minutes every day. I still haven't mastered it, but it's a good.
Yeah, something I have to put my reminders on my calendar, to keep up with certain people, and one exercise that I like to do is list 5 or 8 people that you want to focus on and just focus on those people, and just make sure that you're texting them or calling them or emailing them, every week or so. But that's one exercise that I found very helpful. I tend to be very much an introvert. I tend to be very much would rather stay in my home office and, do stuff on my computer all day. So for me, it's got to be deliberate. And it sounds like the same for you guys. That you just have to deliberately do it because you're not naturally good at it. And that's, we're in the same boat there. So let's shift gears right now and actually start talking about this particular deal. So first question that I'd like to ask is how you found the deal.
Well, we were pretty active in the market. We were out there meeting a lot of brokers and looking for boots on the ground, trying to set up as much infrastructure as possible in our team locally. And we'd been out there looking at deals. This particular deal was a little bit hidden, as I think it was more advertised as a student housing,
Right.
which is not something we do. We don't know anything about it, and not a market that even now we're totally interested in.
Yeah, this one is distressed property at the listing occupancy only 75%. And it's listed as student housing. It doesn't pay much attention, but we evaluate the property in that area. We're really interested in that market.
And I think it's critical to say being present in either having your boots on the ground team built up or being able to get out there yourself. Tells the broker you're serious, tells the seller you're serious, and tells your team members you're serious.
Yeah.
Right.
So to getting back on a plane and flying out there and looking at it right away, I think was key.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the catalysts in my journey was getting in my car and driving to my target market and spending a week there. And that's the relationships from that trip is what landed us our first deal. I actually ended up touring the property that ended up being our first deal on that trip too. And I wouldn't have ever seen it had I not made that trip. But yeah, absolutely. Getting out to the markets shows the brokers and everyone else that you're serious, especially, in your case where you're living in the Oakland area and investing in Texas. So marketed as a student housing, a little bit distressed, I think 75% occupancy. So tell us what you guys liked about it and what your business plan ended up being. And then we'll go into the raising capital piece, which is always fun for first deals.
Sure. Yeah, no. So I went down there and looked at it and found a very unique property, large, 12-foot ceilings and cement floors and rafter style, industrial look to it. Had some really good bones. And I think as, a builder contractor, I liked the structure, and I physically, liked what I saw and liked the bones of the building. It wasn't your average garden style. And don't get me wrong, I'll go for a garden style all day long when the numbers and everything are right. But this was a little bit different, a little bit unique. The location was fantastic.
Right.
And I just liked everything about it. But at the same time, we had this huge question marks. I'm like, why is everything around this at 97% occupied, and why is this at 70% occupied? What the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother story.
Right. So yeah, Doug visited the property right away and talked to the broker. And then the property built 1988 and 1999, very new build. And the average unit square footage is almost 1,000 square footage, very big unit. And the good unit mix, 40% is for a 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom. So we feel like even is listed as student housing.
Yeah.
So it's very suitable for the conventional renters. And then we do analyze the market, and the market vacancy rate is only 3.6%. So it's wow, it's
a hot market.
Hidden gem with distressed properties.
Yeah, and I'd like to take a little sideline here. Your partners and how you're evaluating this are really important. In this case, it was FPI Management and Amber and Tasha with their group that help us really drill down on the market and analyze this deal. That was critical. We probably interviewed a lot of management companies there. They're a big company, and for them to take the time for this small 56 units and really nail down the market fundamentals, and physically they drove out there and looked at it.
Nice.
Was critical for helping us underwrite it.
Right. So we find
it's another relationship.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we kind of decide, this property, the issue is mismanagement. Is doesn't appear in the market.
I wouldn't say so much mismanagement is just a broken down relationship between the owners and the management company. They both had their issues with each other. So yeah, I don't want to single out management here. That was a relationship that just wasn't working anymore.
Right. So just like you cannot find this online, the property is online, no marketing, no visibility. But we do think we can work on it. So we have very good business plan and make it fill in the vacancy very well.
Yeah, and it was no clear thing. We were buying this at a +2 cap, which, as you know, is not something you do.
Well, on a distressed property, the cap rate is usually low, and the way I think about it is, let's say their income equals their expenses. Your NOI is going to be 0, which means you're buying at a 0 cap, right? So, yeah, I mean, the lower the income is, the lower that cap rate is going to come down. So, I think it's for the distressed properties and for the value adds, I typically don't look at the cap rate going in, because I think that cap rate really only applies to the stabilized properties. So if you're looking at that market cap rate, it applies to the stabilized properties, and distressed properties will have their own cap rate, and when the appraisers come in and look at it, they have a different way of determining value. But anyway, yeah, that said, yeah, low cap rates for distressed properties is very, very common. So, we've bought it very low cap rates before.
Yeah, I think that's critical. There is a lot of emphasis on cap when we're underwriting deals from the fundamentals, and you have to be able to look past that.
Yeah. Right. And something else that I'd like to highlight that you said is when you're looking at a distressed property, you always have to ask why, and go several levels deep. Why is the occupancy low? Market occupancy is 97% from what you guys said, and this one is at 70%, and if you can pinpoint why, that's the first step in fixing things. I think it's a little bit dangerous or a little bit risky going into something like this without, finding that why out, and then proceeding with it, and then finding out, the real reason why is we need to put X amount of CapEx dollars into it that we didn't account for. So, if you can, like you guys did, if you can dial down to the reason why, which was a broken relationship, and not being advertised, I mean, that's a quick fix. That's a really quick fix. Start advertising.
And we spend a lot of time to talking with the property management. Doug mentioned that, and we pick the one FPI because they have 4 property in the same market with 98% occupied and 1% of economy loss.
And we did our research. This was not, we didn't never take anything for granted that we hear. And in this case, we looked at their properties. That was not just on market or properties that they weren't counting that were offline for renovations. That was total numbers that they were working with. And we looked at their numbers. They were spot on.
Right.
Yeah. Nice. And that the property manager is such a key partnership that you're going to have. And that's one that can make or break any deal. So, so neat. So I love the attention to detail you guys had going in. Let's talk about something that I think is probably the most difficult on first deals. I'm curious to hear how it went for you guys. Let's talk about raising capital for this.
It was the most difficult thing. Building the team was the most difficult thing, period. And we, as Xiaofeng said earlier, we had the deal and then we built the team. That's not the way to do it.
Right.
And we went through, we were really stressed out. We went through a lot of people helping us get sponsors and investors, a lot of people. I was really surprised because we came to them kind of late. And this was a recourse loan. So, that requires a relationship in advance. That's not something a lot of people are excited about getting into with you.
Right.
Even though you have a great deal. And they all said that we love this deal, but we just met this month and you're closing in a month. So a 6-month relationship would have been gotten us very far.
I feel like for the first time multifamily buyer or investor, finding a sponsor is like, or finding a deal is like a question of chicken and egg. You
Mhm.
find,
Yeah.
it's the chicken first or egg first. So
Yeah.
you
Right.
get the deal first, or you find the sponsor, or you find the sponsor first,
Yeah.
or you find the deal. So
Yeah.
for us, we find the deal first. But the difficulty part is when under contract, the clock is clicking,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and we really kind of tight to find a partner who we can work with and in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we do have difficulty to find that. But at the time we reach out so many people, and we get so
Mhm.
many help from experienced people to connect with us with
Yeah.
in
And
sponsors.
it was a coincidence. We wanted to join MIH, which is a very much
Mhm.
networking centered group. But they were full. So we just happened to get in there in November
Mhm.
networking, and that really changed the game for bringing a lot of names to the table, and
Mhm.
a lot of help and everything else, and getting the word out.
Yeah, absolutely. And incidentally, I've been on the sponsorship side of one property, and Xiaofeng, I think you're right. It's a chicken and egg situation. I've had a lot of people without deals call me up and ask if I, would be their sponsor, and it's like,
Yeah. What are we talking about?
yeah,
Right.
well, when you get a deal, let's talk, and on the flip side, it's kind of the same thing from my perspective. On the flip side, if they wait till they have the deal to call, now it's just like exactly what you said. It's like, well, we just met and you want me to sign on a recourse loan. It really, it's difficult. And I think the best thing to do is to try to build those relationships, the best you can, and do what it takes to maintain relationships with people that can be sponsors. Just like most people, we had to have a sponsor come in on our first project. And between me and my partners, we were all involved in a couple of different coaching programs, and we reached out to one of our coaches, and that's what worked for us. But, most people find the same thing you guys did, is to get that commercial loan, you have to have, somebody who's got the experience to be able to sign off that as well. So, very, very important point there. And, I'm glad that, joining MIH was able to help you guys. I've heard a lot of great things about that group, and you're almost convincing me to join just by talking about it. So
It's a really interesting group too, because they're based out of New York, most of them,
Mhm.
but they have a lot of people out here on the West Coast with us.
Yeah.
So
is
we're
that the
right-
Marco Barbaro group?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Yeah.
And Hadar's one of the leaders in the group, and we just kept running into people from them over and over and over again out here and everywhere else. We're like, well, and it was critical. I know I've harped on it before, but relationships are everything in this arena.
Yep.
And being able to meet a group that just focused on relationships. They do the fundamentals and all that stuff, but 90% of it for us is networking.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about, we're coming up on our time limit, but let's talk about after closing, because I think there's a lot of value to be added here. You close on a property that 75% when you started looking at it. My understanding is it was 80% at closing. Let's talk about the first couple months of operations.
Yeah, everybody always says closing is the hardest part, and then as soon as you close, they say now the real work starts. You're like, oh my gosh, the closing almost killed us, literally. So the first few months we were surprised, but people warned us, but we were still surprised at how much work there was. I think we did a good job. We had a good little group that we built in finding this deal. That was the benefit of our hard work in closing it. Was a great group of people in our group, and then I think we're fairly systematic in dividing up the work. We had a pretty good idea of who and what needed to be done, and we met very early on and started dividing things up.
Right.
And it really worked out. We have some people that are great at marketing. We have some people that are great with the Facebook and all that stuff, and had some people that are great with the actual management of the property. However, I think we took a little bit too much of that on ourselves.
Right. So we really appreciate we have a good GP team
Mhm.
and everybody involved, and then in the certain area. So key part is really chasing the property management.
Yeah.
We mentioned the property management company we use is a big company.
Mhm.
The good thing is for the COVID, they really, probably a lot of property is really short of labor or management.
Yep.
They can moving the
Especially
staff
in
around.
a smaller market like Waco.
Right.
There's smaller management companies and they really started to suffer for manpower and the ability to get out there.
Right. So we are lucky to have people to cover our property.
Mhm.
But at the same time, they kind of slow wrapping up or slower than
They're a bigger organization, so they
our
have their process to
Right.
get things done and they have to follow it.
Yeah.
And we're always nervous. We got 56 units here and it's a huge company. They're like, when are they going to just quit when we keep bugging them and bugging and bugging them to do all this stuff?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
pros and cons of the large organizations. Large organizations are generally not nimble, but they have a lot of firepower.
Right.
That's,
And that's the case.
I got a military background, so I talk firepower, but, and with the small property management companies, you have just the opposite,
Right.
and if you have a 56 unit with a property management company that manages, 500, that's 10%, and they're, hopefully they pay you a lot more attention because you're a larger portion of their portfolio, but that doesn't always translate. So
Right.
we've gone back and forth between the virtues and whatnot of large property management companies versus the mid-size versus the small. And the more and more I think about it, the more I think the larger ones are where you need to stick. So
It really
my 2
is.
cents.
I think that's, you never know. You might find that
Yeah.
perfect company, but one of the key people leaves and you're done.
Yeah.
Whereas the larger company, and we're pushing and pushing a lot. And,
Right.
we knew we had something when after a couple months, they never gave up and just said, all right, that's enough.
Yeah.
Or we got to shut you down on this. They just kept doing it. They just kept saying, okay, or this isn't a good idea. Here's why. They just never slowed down.
Yeah. Good thing is they are very transparent and
Totally.
consider our request. We kind of pushing hard because our goal is to fill in the vacancy as quick as possible.
Yeah, this is a
like one or
management play.
two months.
Yeah.
So right now, almost like two and a half months, we get over 90% occupied.
Nice.
So
Nice.
so we're very
It
happy.
was funny. We had these giant 4-bedroom units, 1,600 square feet. And we're like, who's going to want to live here? They just buy a house or rent a house.
Yeah.
And, so we pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. And then just one day, all of them rented up in like a week. So after doing all this stuff, so,
we do intensively of marketing, social media, Facebook market, Google ads, and the property website.
That again was a lucky relationship with one of our GP members. And Helen and Alex.
Yeah, they are very dedicated.
They've done it before in their own business.
Right.
And just they knew what they were talking about. And I think this is one more detail. I know you're almost out of time, but them being able to help the management company in some of these arenas and fill in little gaps instead of just asking the management company to do a Facebook page and sit there on it all day and respond to people. Is key. They see we're doing the work.
I know a lot of the larger multifamily investors or the groups will do a lot of that in-house, so they will automatically put the web page up, especially on the larger properties makes sense. Maybe not on a 56 unit, but, a Facebook page is super simple to do. Facebook ads, Google ads is super simple to do. A lot of times the operators, the asset managers will do a lot of that just to relieve that burden off the property management, because sometimes the property managers are, a lot of times they're set in their ways and sometimes they don't want to, add that other thing to your plate. Or, if you're dealing with a large organization, maybe it's hey, we just don't do Facebook ads. And if you can do your own Facebook ads and make sure that you're adding the leads, that's very helpful in the situation. So
I mentioned it with the group by saying Neil Bawa style. He's the one that I quoted for a lot of that stuff. And he's out there clicking on websites and has VAs responding.
Got an army of them. Yeah.
Army of them. and
So,
bringing that website up to the top of every search engine out there. So
yeah.
that really stuck in my mind.
So let's start wrapping things up. What's next for the two of you?
We're busy. We are out there
Mhm.
making these relationships work and finding deals. We hopefully have a couple more LOIs to get out here
Mhm.
soon this week.
Mhm.
We're focusing on markets. We see some variability in Texas for insurance in Texas, so it's
Mhm.
I got a flag. But no, we are very busy getting our next deal together now that we got some green lights for our current deal, and it's starting to stabilize out.
Mhm.
So we're not resting, and hope to have
Awesome.
some deals going here soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And hopefully the law of the first deal works in your favor like it does for many. So,
Well,
yeah.
I know we're short in time, but our next deal, if it works, will be because we closed on this one right next
Yeah.
door to a property, and that cued somebody's interest.
Yeah. Yeah. It absolutely does. It puts you on the map. I mean, you have one property, 56 unit, several $1 million purchase price.
Yeah.
It shows to the brokers that you can close. And that's, I think, why the law of the first deal really works, is because, prior to that, you guys were aspiring investors, people who wanted, and sometimes brokers look at, people in that situation as tire kickers, as not worthy of my time. But you guys have demonstrated that you can close, that you can push through a lot of the adversity you had, and brokers see that. So now that you own something, you're on a completely different level with the brokers you're talking to. So that said, what advice would you guys give an aspiring investor 6 to 12 months behind you? And let's do this. Let's have individuals. So Xiaofeng, you go first, and then Doug, you can follow up.
Okay. For me, the big advice is to step out of the comfort zone to networking before you have the first deal. So know what your core value is, and what the skill you can contribute to other teams, and what is the partner you're looking for. So when you're connecting, you can know, or when you have a deal, you can know you can reach out immediately. And also, don't afraid to ask for help, because in our deal, there's definitely have nights we're worried to close it. But at the same time, when I feel like there is so many our investor friends, our mentors helping us and give us the help, that is how the motivation we getting through the difficulties and get this done.
Awesome. And Doug, same question for you. What advice would you give an aspiring investor 6 to 12 months behind you?
I would think my advice is a little more systematic. Number one, do develop these relationships, even if it's new people like you.
Yeah.
Get out there and network, and have a core group of friends already set up. And also be aware that when you make a deal, that you're going to have to still scramble to get the final pieces to put together while you're trying to close it. That's just life. You have to set certain goals, and you have to meet them. Meet so many people every week, and make so many LOIs every week or every month. And then build a schedule, an actual physical schedule that you're writing down that allows you to do this. Don't expect to be able to do this on your free time. You have to have a schedule that allows you to make these check marks in your daily goals.
You have to be deliberate about that. Yeah. So I love the advice you guys both gave. It's very, very important. I mean, slightly different directions, but getting out of your comfort zone is huge, and having your weekly metrics or your daily metrics for talking to people, reviewing deals is really going to push things down the road a lot faster. So last question, how can listeners learn more about you?
I think our website's pretty cool. Take a look at that. It's got some of the stuff we built, and luckily we have something to say. We did build some things. Yeah, and they're pretty cool, and we're pretty proud of them. So our website, our Facebook page, one of my goals, and I will never give up on it, even though I failed many times, is to get more content on our Facebook page, and so people can watch us grow and move and everything else, and just give little updates there. So many people tell me how they found deals or they made relationships via that medium. It's not my comfort zone, but you got to get out of your comfort zone, I think, is a theme that's evolving here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Put links to the website and to the Facebook page in the show notes. So anybody who's interested in reaching out to them or learning more about them, just, tap, swipe, and tap, and that magical internet will whisk you away. So anyway, thank you very much for coming on the show today. Appreciate your time, and, looking forward to hearing you guys talk about that second, third, and fourth deal.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it and love the show, and look forward to talking with you more.
Right.
Awesome. Hey, if you like that episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community, the Tribe of Titans, yet, you are missing out. So get yourself 30 days free by clicking the link below in the description, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.